All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar is being recorded. So we are doing that so that if you need to refer back to this webinar or any of the resources, you will have access to it. Just know that it will be about 2 to 3 days before it will be posted on our school counseling webpage. So first, I want to go ahead and welcome everyone to our second annual Spring Refresh Professional Learning Series for school counselors. My name is Tanya Bulette, and I'm the counseling coordinator for the San Diego County Office of Education. And like I mentioned, the workshop will be recorded, but we're very excited to kick off our second annual Spring Refresh series with a wonderful presenter. First of all, this workshop is, the description of it is that we are going to be increasing parent engagement. It can be challenging. So as our students are different, so are parents. In this webinar, we will discuss new and effective methods and strategies that work successfully with diverse parents to support student success. Like I mentioned, I'm very excited that Fran is kicking off our series today. She is an elementary school counselor in the Poway Unified School District, and I'm sure she will also share some of the other things that she is doing out there. But I do want to mention that Fran is a school counselor at No Excuses University at Los Penasquitos, AKA Los Pen is what they call their school. And Fran began working there in 2003, the year that No Excuses University was born, and she's going to talk more about that. Known to her students and families simply as Mrs. H, Fran is committed to supporting the social and emotional needs of her students in a way that facilitates academic success at the same time. By creating innovative and effective strategies, Fran has helped to positively impact the school climate, parent involvement, and community outreach at Los Pen Elementary School. She is also the author of the book, Differentiated Parent Support, which details her personal journey and experiences engaging families in unique ways to support student success. And last but not least, Fran was also selected as our San Diego County 2022 Elementary School Counselor of the Year. So it's an honor to have you here today, Fran, and I'm going to go ahead and let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Tanya. Well, that's hard to follow. I'm humbled. Thank you for the nice introduction. Hello, everyone. Great to see everybody. Well, I don't quite see all of you, but I'm glad that you're all here. As Tanya mentioned, I work at Los Penasquitos Elementary School, which is part of Poway Unified School District. I was working at some other schools prior to coming to Los Pen. Some of you might have that perception that Poway Unified School District is a very affluent school district, and that is somewhat true. We have a lot of affluence. However, there are 4 what we call our Title I schools, and Los Pen is one of those. So when the counselor had to leave from Los Pen back so many years ago, my counseling director came to me and said, "You're going to Los Pen." And I said, "Well, that's okay. I'm really happy at the schools that I'm at." And she looked at me and said, "I'm not really inviting you. You're going." So off I went to Los Pen, but it was fate that had intervened for me, because the moment I walked through the gates of the school, I knew I was in the right place. It's an incredible little school. At one time, we were the lowest performing school in our district, and very low performing in the state. Within a few years of me being here, and it's not just because of me, it's because of everyone on our campus, we became one of the highest performing schools in the state of California. When we used to do similar school rankings, we were in the top 10% for similar schools, and we were also in the top 10% for all schools. Back at that time, we would get, we became a 10-10 school is what they called it. And we did that 5 times. And we ended up being #1 in similar schools, I think 3 times. So we really turned this school around for these students. A former principal that showed up on our steps, he basically looked at all the staff and said, "You're a great group of people. You love your kids. We love what you do for them. You're probably the hardest working teachers I've ever met." And everybody was really flattered. And then he said, "But there's something else I've learned about you." And they all looked at him and he said, "You don't believe these students can learn." And everybody was really offended. And he said, "I say that because they're not. And there's not really any reason they shouldn't be learning just like all of the other kids in our district, just because they might speak a different language or they have a different culture or different color skin, whatever it might be, they have the same potential to learn. And that's where the no excuses came from. No excuses starts with the adults. There's no excuses for students not learning on our campus. One of the things, and so that's been that's a whole nother presentation. I could do an hour on no excuses and the 6 systems that we built and how we did that. Maybe that's something for the spring refresh for next year. But today what we want to talk about is parents. One of the first things in the first week or two that I was at Los Penn, I recognized that the parent group was different than the schools that I had come from, and not different in a judgmental or bad way, just different. They weren't as visible on campus. They didn't seem to be quite as engaged with their kids' education. And so immediately I went to the principal and said, we've got to work on this because parent involvement can really impact students in such a positive way. So fortunately, he was very supportive and we started doing some work on that. We had a school climate committee. So several folks, we all started working on how could we look at parent involvement and how could we increase parent involvement? How could we make that impact? And so one of the first things, and I think you all know this, I don't think I need to say this even, we know our world has changed. Our world is very different. We don't have the Leave It to Beaver kind of families of the 60s, right? And they've even changed from 10 years ago. And they've certainly changed with all of the technology. But what hasn't changed, I think, in some schools across the country is how we work with our parents. And so that was one of the first things that we realized. It's like, okay, our parents have changed, but we haven't necessarily responded to that change. So we really wanted to take a look at our families and take a look at how families were different to try to understand what can we do to move into a direction to really help these parents become more engaged to support their students. And so that was our goal. I want to remind you and inspire you, hopefully, that if you're here because you want to increase parent engagement, then hopefully this is one of your first steps, because you can't get anywhere until you take that first step. So the first step into getting somewhere is to decide you are not going to stay where you are. So I'm going to challenge you that whatever might be happening on your campuses right now, some of it's great, leave it, but do you need to take a step in another direction? And hopefully I'll be leaving you with some ideas of things you can put into place. You could put them into place tomorrow if you want. What our committee ended up doing, so there's basically for me 4 steps, and all of this is outlined in my book that Tanya talked about. I'm just giving you a really brief overview. Basically, there's 4 steps to increase parent involvement for the way that we see it at Los Penn. First of all, it's no fun to work alone. So let's get some people together that have the same love and passion, such as increasing parent involvement, and let's work together. I think a job is always easier with more ideas and more folks working together. And it's also a lot more fun. The first thing we needed to do was define parent involvement. I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. And then the next thing to do is evaluate what are the challenges and barriers that are keeping our families from not being involved and engaged in their child's education. And then finally put a plan together. And so I'm going to just, briefly be sharing with you how we did all of that. So here, starting with defining parent involvement, if I asked all of you right now to give me your definition of parent involvement, I'm going to guess I would get some similar definitions, but I'd have a wide range, right? We all kind of have a different perception of what it might be, what we're thinking that it is, right? And so in order for our committee to work well together, we needed to have the same understanding or belief in what parent involvement is. And so we sat together and brainstormed and came up with our definition of parent involvement. And so the definition I'm going to share with you, this is outlined also in the handouts that are going to be in the chat. You're welcome to take that definition and use it. That's why I share it with you. You can add things, you can take things away, whatever works for your school. But I'm going to share the definition of what we believe parent involvement is. So there's a lot of elements to parent involvement, and we were able to group them into 3 areas. Parent support, which is all the things that we are hoping can happen at home. Parent engagement, how are they engaging with the school and the school staff? And then how are we in turn as educators engaging with them. So that's that kind of two-way street. And then parental participation, that's really about volunteering. And that's, I have to be honest, when I was a parent and I heard about parent involvement, what I thought about was parent participation. You know, going to school and helping out in a class party or volunteering in the class or being on PTA. But for me, the other two elements, parent support and parent engagement, are far more critical to determine the success of our students academically. So let's look at those a little bit more closely. When we talk about parent support and what happens at home, these are all things that as educators, as counselors, you know these things, you know that these are important. One of the first ones that we looked at is how important meaningful dialogue is, particularly with all of the technology. You know, put the phones down and sit and have a conversation, make eye contact, ask what and how questions, meaningful dialogue. That's a really important one. There was a study that was done many years ago in Detroit, a long time ago, but I have always remembered the results of that study. What they did in Detroit is they encouraged all of it at a preschool. They encouraged all of the adults working there to only ask students what and how questions, not asking any did you, would you, could you, will you, won't you, are you, aren't you? None of those kinds of questions, right? Because if I say, did you have a nice day? Yes. And said, what was the best part of your day? And again, you know this technique. Our parents don't though. Our parents don't necessarily know it. Some do, but not all. So meaningful dialogue. And on 5 minutes a day over a school year, these students had an average increase in their IQ of 7 points. So we share that with our parents. We talk to our parents about what is meaningful dialogue and why is it important? Like you can actually help raise your child's IQ level. The other thing that we talk to our parents about that's important, because a big piece of what we do at Los Penn is we don't assume that parents have all of the knowledge that they need quite yet. And so we welcome them to come to events so that we can share some of this information. And I'll tell you how we do that as well. So the second thing would be reasonable expectations, that we want to be sure that these students have expectations that are developmentally appropriate, but that we also want to be sure that they're high enough. I mean, sometimes even at Los Penn back 20 years ago, instead of having expectations up here of what kids are capable of, a lot of our staff had expectations down here. And so we needed to kind of raise that for both behavior and academics. So we talked to our parents about that and about sharing the expectations with their children. Again, all of us on this webinar, we know that routines are so important, not just to kids, it's important to grown-ups. You know, if you walked into your campus today and the principal said, oh, I changed the lunch schedule, we're gonna do something different now, you know, you'd all be like, what? So for kids, some of our kids, you know, we had a survey, a California Healthy Kids survey a couple of years ago, and we had kids saying they felt safer at school than at home. Well, some of that's just because we have so much structure and routine, and they know what's expected of them. In fact, one of the things that Los Penn does incredibly well, and this is like another whole presentation, is how we've developed our school climate. You know, we have a lot of universal expectations all across the campus. So routines are really important, and we talk to parents about that, a bedtime routine, a homework routine, having fun routine, and how valuable all of those are. Supporting homework, not doing homework for them. So finding a time and a place for them to get that done. We have a lot less homework than we used to. So that's not a big issue, but we do share that with our parents. Limits, this is another thing I could talk about for an hour. Limits on TV and video, how important that is, that kids need to develop empathy and social skills by being in person with people. But that means that parents need to put limits on their TV and video games as well. So really working with parents about that. And then finally, they need to get their kids to school every day on time, ready to learn. And we talk to them about what it means to be ready to learn, having breakfast and getting to school, you know, 5 minutes before it starts and all of those things. And I'm going to share with you, how do we tell our parents all of these things? The second one, parent engagement, you can see that that's home to school. So it's both of us, right? We can't rely or expect our parents to establish relationships. Particularly, I think when we're working with a school, like our school has 44% English language learners, and some of you I know have much higher. We have like 38 different languages if you take into account all of the dialects. some of these people feel uncomfortable, or they feel shy, or they feel intimidated. So if they're not establishing a relationship with us, then we've got to go out of our way to establish relationships with them. And so that's really important. The consistent communication is really important. Finding a way for parents to know exactly where to go. I think so many of our schools are doing such a great job in today's world with really keeping their websites up to date. So many counselors and teachers end up having their own websites or classrooms, so the parents know that there's a place that they can go to get that information. But when I talk about consistent communication, I think it's also important to recognize that we shouldn't only call parents when there's a problem. We should find ways to also call parents when there's things positive that are happening, because there's a new thing on our phones. Actually, it's been there a really long time. It's called caller ID. And if the only time I'm calling a parent is because I'm calling to tell them their child did something wrong, guess what? They hit the I'm not going to answer button. So really being sure that we're careful and aware of that. And then taking advantage of 21st century communication. This has been kind of a slow evolution for our school. Some of you might have gotten to this faster, but really taking advantage of using things like Google Voice, because so many of our parents that we're finding, they respond more effectively, more quickly to a text than to an email or to a phone call. So using something like the technology of Google Voice, using things like the teachers have apps, they're going out of my brain right now, but to communicate with parents back and forth. So there's lots of apps back there, and some of them can be one way that teachers can send reminders and notices, and some of them are two-way. So finding 21st century communication that we can use. Our school rules, we say, are for everybody, for the parents, for the teachers, for every educator on campus, for the kids. We base our rules on six things, and it's the character counts pillars. Okay, so, oh good, Tanya, you said remind. Thank you, I appreciate that. It just went out of my head. So what we do with our school climate is our school-wide rules are the 6 pillars of character. So trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and good citizenship. And so we introduce that to our parents as well and ask them to follow those same rules. We also really encourage our parents to be sure that and we give them reasons to really value education and work. We talk about college at Los Penn, and we share with our parents why we talk about college. We recognize that kids may go to a technical school as well. They might go to a community college, but we need to start talking about college at a very early age so that kids have that vision, and then really supporting that college readiness. And then the final one, I don't spend a lot of time on this because everybody's very familiar with this. This is like being a parent volunteer. So being on school committees, community activities, attending school events. And we love all of that. But if you told me to choose one of these 3 areas, I'm going to choose parent support, what's happening at home. For me, I think that makes the biggest impact on how successful students. All of them are helpful, but that's the most important, I think. So then the question becomes, we teach our parents that, how important their involvement is. We show them some videos, but then why aren't all parents involved? Is it because they don't love their kids? And we know that's not true. They love their kids as much as anybody else loves their kids, right? There's something stopping them from becoming involved and supportive, and you know that. They have barriers. There's things happening in their world that are keeping them from doing what they need to for their kids. And it's not out of the lack of love. So one of the first things you really need to ask yourself, if you're going to do this work, is look at your school, look at your parent community. What are the barriers for your families? Identify those. That's important. And so some of them that come up all the time when I work with different schools are transportation, language. Like I said, we've got 38 different languages. Language is hard for us. Many San Diego schools, their largest second language group might be Spanish speaking. And so that makes it pretty easy to do things in both languages, and we have Spanish speaking teachers. We only have about 22% of Spanish speaking. We have another 24% of family speaking Tagalog. We've got a lot of families speaking Farsi and Persian and Korean. So we've got a wide range. Language is a big challenge for Los Pen. Substance abuse, that's a tough one because that's one that we don't have a lot of control over other than maybe making reports. Physical and mental health issues, trying to help with resources. Many of our parents are really struggling with time because of jobs. They just don't have enough time. They might have 3 or 4 kids, and then they have maybe 2 jobs. So it's a challenge. It's not from lack of wanting, it's from lack of time and because of the jobs. And then another one is culture. You know, everybody's cultures are a little bit different and recognizing those. So I hear about these from a lot of other schools. These are certainly things that affect our families at Los Penasquitos. So the next thing to do is when we look at our list of barriers, then let's see what we can do about them, right? Let's see what we can do about eliminating some of those. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example of a family that I'll always remember. They arrived at our school one day. Here's another barrier that I didn't mention before, the front office. We need to be sure that our front office staff is welcoming families into our school as if they're welcoming them into our home. We have that at Los Pen. We're really grateful and blessed with that. And so I had a family that showed up at Los Pen, and within about 5 minutes, my school secretary knew their life story. She's like a little counselor all on her own. She shared the story with me immediately with permission from the family. They had moved here from Virginia. She had a 5th, a 3rd, and a 2nd grader. The reason they came to San Diego was because she was coming back home. And the reason she was coming back home is because they had lost their home in a fire. And in that fire, unfortunately, she lost her husband, the stepdad of those 3 kids. So she was coming back to San Diego, but on the way to San Diego, she was driving with her Suburban with what she had left. It breaks down somewhere in middle America. She had no money to fix it. So she sold the car and got enough money for plane tickets and arrived in San Diego. When I went across the street to see her in the apartments across the street, they are Section 8 housing across the street. When I went to see her, all that this family of 4 had was 2 blankets that a neighbor had given them and 1 pillow. They had no furniture. They had no lamps to be able to see at night because there's no overhead lighting. It was really devastating to see this for this family. And they were so sweet. So because of our community outreach, which again is another whole session we could do, I reached out to my community outreach partner immediately. And within days, we had a table to put lamps on. We had a table to eat at. We had pots and pans to cook with. Everybody got a bed. Everybody got blankets. Everybody got pillows. Prior to that, mom was in survival mode. And when mom's in survival mode, is she going to even have a moment to think about school and what she needs to do to support her kids? No. And my community outreach partner took it a little farther. She went and helped this mom find a car for like very little money and got money donated to buy the car. And she connected her with some job interviews, and she was able to get a job as a sheriff's dispatcher. So did we eliminate those barriers for that mom? Oh, we sure did. And then we could really push on her to help us with the student piece, with the student involvement piece. The next one will be reducing. You know, we have a lot of families that are struggling with, you know, what they're going to put on the table every night. They're struggling with gas, especially right now. And so how can we reduce that struggle for them? Well, we have community outreach partners where we have groceries that they can pick up every month. We have bread delivered every week. We have clothing drives for families. We have things at Thanksgiving and winter break where we'll do fundraising to get things for the family so that they can. We did a coat drive one year. It was kind of cool. And it really, this is something else I'll always remember. The mom came to me and she said, I'm so grateful that you gave my daughter a coat because now I can use that money that I was going to use for a coat to get her some fun things for Christmas. So really cool to be able to reduce those challenges for those parents. And then finally, neutralize, especially when it comes to something like substance abuse or mental health issues. There's only so much we can do in that area. Again, we can make reports, we can find resources, but we can be a little limited to that. So then what we need to do is try to neutralize. We have 2 different programs here at school. It's from 6 to 6. So if we have kiddos that we're concerned about what's happening for them at home, we try to get them on campus and try to have them here from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. Because remember, my friends, so many people will say this, relationships and connections are so important. And those are the things that are life-changing. And those are the things that's going to get people out of poverty. So, all right. So how do we increase this parent involvement? Let me just check my phone here for time. Okay. So what we discovered is one size does not fit all. And we were treating all parents kind of the same. So we realized, okay, we can't treat all parents the same. We've got to do this a little differently. So one of the things that made us realize that is as we were looking at our different families, we started kind of looking at them in where they might be on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? I mean, if we've got parents that are at self-actualization, great. They probably don't need much help at all. They're automatically involved, or even in esteem needs, right? But when we have people struggling with belonging and love needs, or safety needs, or just the biological physical needs, they're starting to be in survival mode then. And so it's really hard to get them to really be making school that priority that we want them to. So when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that kind of gave us the idea, we kind of did one of these V8 moments where, we do a phenomenal job with differentiated instruction for our students. Why can't we do that for our parents? Why can't we differentiate, figure out where they're at? And instead of expecting them to be where we want them to be, meet them where they are and guide them there and help them get there. Okay, so that's what we try to do, find ways to support them and help them learn how to be involved. So when we look at differentiated student instruction, we came up with the concept of differentiated parent support. And I'll talk about what that looks like. So we kind of look at our families, just how a teacher's going to look at kids in reading or math in different tiers or in different places based on where they're at. We started looking at our parents in that exact same way. So really trying to differentiate and identify where they're at. Because if I have a lot of tier 1 parents that are ideal parents that are doing everything that we would hope they could do, then we don't have to worry too much about them. It's really my tier 2 and my tier 3 families that I need to put more focus on. And certainly the tier 3 is who I put the greatest focus on. So an inconsistent parent is somebody that, maybe 60% of the time the homework gets to school, or 60% of the time the kids come to school, they're rested, they come to school that they've had breakfast, but it's not all the time. We would love to see 100% of the time they come to school having had breakfast, having been rested, coming with what they need to be prepared. And then the tier 3 struggling parents, those are people that truly are in survival mode. So when we look at the parents at Los Pen, we believe that we had to look and say, okay, who's doing a great job? Who's kind of just doing okay? Who needs to increase? So this would be something that you could do with a committee. Look at your parent community and just kind of based on what you hear from parents, based on any data that you might, from teachers, based on any data you might have, kind of try to guesstimate where are our parents? Who's doing a great job? Who's kind of just mediocre, okay? Who needs to increase it? And the reason it's a valuable thing to do this, especially in the beginning of this work, is then you can see how your parents grow over time. So for Los Pen, we have about 45%, almost 50% of our parents that we believe are tier 1 parents, which is cool. We didn't start there, by the way. Then about 35% are tier 2, which is not really a lot of parents compared to all 100% of them. And then finally, tier 3, which is where we spend probably most of our time working with those families, about 20%. And so it's helpful to know that so that we know where to put our focus, and also so that it doesn't feel quite so overwhelming to do this differentiation. So that's the 3 tiers. So when we did this work, we started with 3 tiers, and then we realized after about 4 years, hang on one second, we do have a 4th tier, unfortunately. We do have some parents that no matter what we do, no matter what interventions we provide, no matter what resources, no matter how we help, they are just really, really checked out. And so we have to be sure that those kiddos are the ones that are for sure either in our 6 to 6 program or another kind of program, but really providing as much support as possible to that child. So what are some of the strategies? Let's get to some of the fun stuff that you could consider doing in your schools, because that's the definition, that's the barriers, and then that's our tiers. So the very first thing that a committee needs to do, or a group of people needs to do, is look at what you're currently doing to support parent involvement, because many of our schools are doing lots. But the questions you want to ask is, how many people are actually participating? How impactful is it? Is the investment we're putting into this, are we getting our return on investment of our time? Because there's some things that schools will hang on to that really it's like, why are we doing this? We're only getting one parent to show up or two parents to show up. So really reevaluating and considering that. And if you have things that are working, keep them. If you have things that aren't working, look at them and say, what could we do to make this better? How can we change this? How can we improve this? And if you can't do that, then stop doing it. That's what I encourage you to do. We've got way too many things to do in our jobs to be doing something that is just not effective. So really take a look at that, evaluate that. That's an important piece. So one of the first strategies I want to share with you, and we started this for a totally different reason. It kind of happened organically, and that is our NEU Parent Forum. And we started the NEU Parent Forum when we became No Excuses University at Los Penn. And we started talking about college awareness because we wanted to find a way to share with our parents. Why are we talking about college? What do we mean by No Excuses University? So the principal at the time and I, we sat down and said, okay, let's write a newsletter. And then it kind of just seemed too cumbersome to do a newsletter. So then we looked at each other and said, let's ask our parents to come in. And so we did. So we created a 1-hour meeting. Sometimes it's even less. What we ended up saying to our parents is that this parent forum is so important that we consider it a mandatory meeting. Now, can we have a mandatory meeting? Of course we can, but we can't enforce it, right? So we can tell our parents it's mandatory and hope that they'll realize that we mean it's really important. Of course, there is no way to reinforce it, but there is a way to keep track of it. And that's something that I don't know that we do very well. Like we keep data, we do a great job keeping data on reading and math and all of those different things. What data are we keeping on our parents, right? And their involvement. So we do have our parents sign in, as many schools do. You have them sign in when they come in, but then where does that sign-in sheet go? Ours used to just go into a filing cabinet. Well, now ours goes into a data system. And we keep track of parents that actually attended the parent forum, as well as parents that might attend an SST or student success team or response to intervention, or that attend back to school night or any other events we have. We keep that data and it's valuable because what we find is oftentimes when we're working with a student that might be struggling, we'll go back and look at our data and we're going, they didn't come to back to school night. They didn't come to the parent forum. So it's really helpful. And then we talk to them about that. See, another thing I think that we don't always do with our parents is we don't always hold our parents a little more accountable. And so by doing a sign-in, now what we can do is we can send, when we do an NEU parent forum, we don't just do one because parents have lots of different commitments. So we'll do it on several different nights. We'll do one after school. We'll do one in the evening. We'll do one in the morning. We do it all different times so that we don't have to accept an excuse or not excuse, but reason that, I couldn't come because whatever. So what we do is we send the flyer home. Then we look at our list. Okay, 60% of our parents came to the NEU Parent Forum, but 40% didn't. So now what we're going to do is we're going to send them a letter in the mail. And that letter is going to say, hey, we saw that you missed the parent forum. We're so sorry you couldn't come. Fortunately, we're having a couple other nights. Hopefully you can come then, all right? And the third thing we do is if they're still not coming, and by the way, the NEU Parent Forum, we don't ask them to come every year. We ask them to come once in the life of their family's career at our school. So we don't expect them to come every year. We expect them to come once, and we make that really clear. So then the final one is we'll pick up the phone. Hey, we noticed that you didn't come to any of our parent forums. We have some more next week. There's one on Tuesday. There's one on Thursday. Which could I get you to come to? And they might say, I can't come Tuesday or Thursday. You know what? We completely understand how busy you must be. So because of that, and because this information is so important, what we'd like to do then is schedule a time when the principal and I can come see you, and we'll give you all the information in person. And then somehow magically they kind of go, oh, I guess I could come on Tuesday. So, and somebody asked, is it any parent forum in the evening? It is in the evening, but it's also in the morning before school. And it's because we usually do about 6 of them. Okay. And it's also after school. So we have lots of different, and now of course, my friends, we have Zoom, right? So it makes it even easier for some of our parents to get there. So that's our NEU parent forum that we think is highly valuable. It really sets the tone for what our school is about, what the expectations are. This is where during the parent forum, what we're talking about are some important pieces of information. We give them our parent handbook that we have. We share with them what our definition of parent involvement is so that they can understand what we're looking for. We talk about our code of conduct. We talk about how important attendance is. And then the final thing we do is we talk to them about Take 5. And Take 5 is encouraging our families, because we talk to them about meaningful dialogue that I mentioned earlier. We talk to our families about, if you could just find 5 minutes every day for every child to ask 5 meaningful questions, it would build that strong rapport and relationship with you and your child, and it will help them be more successful in school. So we do all of that at that NEU parent forum. Some other things that we have developed, and again, kind of they happened more organically. We have a Spanish-speaking staff member, we have a Farsi-speaking staff member, and we have a Tagalog-speaking staff member, but that's it. And we have lots of other languages. So one day we were trying really hard to help one of our families register, and the language was a huge barrier. And we could get somebody from the district office. We have translators, but that takes time. There happened to be a parent that was right there that said, hey, can I help? And so they started doing all the translation. So we have called on many of our parents as ambassador parents to provide that translation for us, to be available when we have a parent that comes in. As sometimes we even do it, with them in the office and our ambassador parent over the phone. We also then ask both of them to exchange phone numbers. So that ambassador parent, as things are happening at school or things are coming up, they can reach out to that parent and share some of the important information. And likewise, that parent now has somebody, kind of a mentor, right, that they can go to and ask questions and get help. So that's our ambassador parents that we have at Lowe's Penn. The other thing that happened, and this happened with our principal that came 15 years ago, Deanne McLaughlin, she's amazing. And she initiated, and I just love this. She initiated that, we feel that back to school night is really important. It really sets the tone for the teachers in the classrooms and really helps parents understand what's happening there. And we want all parents to come. Now, we had a pretty good, about 80% were almost always coming, but we wanted to be 100%. And so what Deanne started doing is have the teachers keep track of who did not attend back to school night. And that goes into our data system that we have. But she sends a letter the very next day. And the letter says basically, hey, we missed you last night at back to school night. See, a lot of times I think parents, they think that we won't notice. They maybe think it's not that important. But if we're reaching out and saying, hey, we knew you weren't here, we missed you, we wish you could have been, here's some important information, it changes their mindset, right? It really changes their perception. And so because of that, we have about a 99% participation with our back to school night. It's really pretty darn impressive. The other one would be conferences that we do in the fall. And we like to do our fall conferences face-to-face. And so with our fall conferences being face-to-face, again, if a parent's not going to show up, they're going to hear from the principal. And they're going to hear from the principal because she has the child's report card. So she hangs onto their report cards. The school secretary calls the parents and says, hey, Miss McLaughlin has your report card. We need to have you come in and do a quick conference. And then what she ends up doing is going through a lot more data and really talking to the parents and really encouraging them to get engaged and involved with their kiddos. All right, so another strategy for schools, and I think many of you are kind of doing this strategy I'm going to talk about. I don't know how many of you out there are parents. I am the blessed parent of 2 girls who are now grown adults, and they've given me 5 grandkids, 10, 8. Oh no, he just turned 9, 10, 9, 6, 3, and 1. And what I'm excited about is how they're raising their kids because of the things that I did because of some parent education. It's really exciting. But one of the things that I found with both my girls is we had our first daughter, Lauren, and she was maybe the easiest baby I've ever met. I mean, she was just super easy, slept through the night. We would go out to dinner, she'd fall asleep, we'd eat, she'd wake up. I mean, it was crazy. So super sweet, easygoing kid. So I think that's a way of kind of tricking us into having another baby. So we did. Another girl 18 months later. And as happens so frequently, now I realize they were very different, super, super different, really different temperaments, different personalities, the whole deal. And so I was really maxed out as a parent. I didn't quite know what to do with this little girl. Loved her just as much as my oldest daughter. Had to do some paradigm shift, right? I had to start thinking of her as not stubborn, but determined. And I had to think of her as not, overly energetic as to being spontaneous. It was tricky. So I was really struggling. At my parent manual, I didn't have one. She didn't come with one. And I vividly remember, this was 33 years ago. I vividly remember one day with my daughter, so frustrated, at my wit's end. I'm sure my hair was standing up out to here. And I was using my best form of parenting at that time, which was kind of screaming at the top of my lungs. And I live very close to my neighbor next to me. And unfortunately, Marisha's window was open, and so was my neighbor's. And she stood at the window listening to me, and I kind of thought, oh my goodness, this has to end. So that day, I went and signed up for a parenting class. I needed it. It was so important to me. So parent education, I think, is a priority. I just really do. I think parents so much want to do the right thing, and they just don't always know how to, or they don't know what to do. And so that's where our NEU Parent Forum is a part of education. But we also have parent education, and we do it. Whoops, I had to delete that page. I have to just to tell you about it. We have our parent education every single month. We have different topics that we think our parents would like to hear. We try to keep it to 90 minutes. We provide childcare. But here's the thing about our parent education. We don't call it parent education, because I think sometimes that can sound a little bit condescending. So what we call it is Parent University. And we really just promote it in a different way. We do personal invitations. We don't just do flyers. We might do phone calls. We'll have teachers encourage. Like when a teacher is in a response to intervention or student success team, they have the entire year's schedule of what our parent education is. So if they're talking about having issues with kids at home with being organized and executive functioning skills and homework, then they're going to say, oh my gosh, we have a night where it's home to school connection, and they're going to talk about all those things. Why don't we sign you up for that? So, we promote it in kind of a different way, and we get great attendance, surprisingly. I think a lot of times people choose not to do parent education because we don't always get enough people to come, or we don't always get the people we want to come. Like if we really want our tier 3 families there, then guess what? I have to personally invite them. And our teachers even take it a little step further. They'll even do things where they'll say, hey, there's this parent night coming up. I'm going to go because I think it'll help me with my kids. Why don't you join me? So there's ways to do parent education in a whole different way. So that's something important to us too. So I think I talked really fast, Tanya, and I'm nearing the end of my presentation. I took a lot of stuff out because I was worried about our time frames. But hopefully you saw in this presentation where what we did was form a committee. We defined our parent involvement, and that included coming up with those tiers and using the differentiated parent support, looking at our challenges and barriers, and every school is going to be a little bit different, and then putting a plan together. And so that is what Los Pen did to pull us pull us in a totally different direction. And so I love this quote too, another favorite quote of mine. You know, sometimes we sit and get discouraged about parent involvement, but the reality is that if we want to change it, we can. And we know that when a small group of committed, thoughtful people, they can change the world. It's really the only thing that ever has. So that's another thing too that I didn't talk about in here that I'll mention briefly. One of the things I really work with school staffs on is I sometimes feel that there is a very negative perception and complaining about parents. And I think we need to work really hard to not do that and to remove judgment and criticism. Until I've walked in their shoes, until I've had the same footsteps that they've walked, the same path they've walked, who am I to judge? And I think that sometimes we jump to judgment with some of our families. And because we're frustrated, we want what's best for the kids. We want the kids to be okay. And we know that if the parents would just do a little bit of this or a little bit of that, it could make a big impact for that child. But we have to remove that judgment. So an activity I love to do, and some of you could do this if you want to, I'll describe it. It's called Trash the Trash Talk. And I'll sit in a staff meeting and I'll say, okay, here's a sticky note for everybody. I want you to write something on that sticky note that you would either say that's negative about a parent or that you've heard someone say. I want you to write it on the sticky note. Then I gather all the sticky notes, no names on the sticky notes. I gather all the sticky notes and then I read every one of them. And many of them, we kind of all cringe, you know, because some of them were kind of mean. And as I'm reading them, I have a trash can right there and I'm throwing them in the trash can. And I say, we need to make a commitment as a staff that we're not going to trash talk our parents anymore because it's not helpful. When we talk negative and talk trash about a parent, then we develop that negative perception. And if we're going to work successfully with our parents, we need to have the willingness to meet them where they are, recognize who they are, and try to do whatever we can to help them to get where they need to be to help their kiddos. So I'm going to leave you with this thought, and I really hope that you'll take this and think about it. What are you willing to do to engage your parents and engage them differently? All right, that is it for me, Tanya. I finished early, sorry.
No, that's wonderful. And there were so many great points that you talked about, Fran, and, you know, looking at the lens through the parent's eyes as a parent of two now adult children, and my experience working with the elementary school that they went to, you know, definitely didn't always feel comfortable as a parent who was trying to be involved. It was sometimes looked at as being annoying, or when you're trying to ask questions or just get answers, you know, wasn't always treated with that respect. And so I definitely appreciate you bringing that up, that, you know, we needed to find out what our parents are feeling and really welcome them and remove all the barriers, because that's how you will get your parents to get involved, is if the school is not only treating your kids with that respect, but also to them. So I thank you so much. That was an amazing, amazing presentation. Fran has so many great resources. In fact, we're going to post a wonderful handout with all of those resources that she has put together in just a second. And Fran, I don't know if you have the last slide with a link to the survey. There it is. Zarette has also put it in the chat. So if you could just quickly, it literally will take you 1 minute to complete this survey. It's very, very easy. You can point your camera on your phone to the QR code and it'll pop up on your phone. But if you could just take a minute to complete the survey, that would be great. Gives great feedback and an opportunity to write a nice message to Fran. And we will post, or actually we're going to go ahead and put the handout into the chat as well. And so we will have all of those resources available to you. And then again, I mentioned that this is being recorded and we will post this presentation along with her materials onto the San Diego County Office of Ed School Counselor webpage. And Zarette will go ahead and put that link in as well. Yep, she's already got it there. And one last thing, if you haven't already signed up or heard about honoring excellence in school counseling leadership, you have an opportunity to see Fran. You can purchase a book that she has written with all of these strategies, get her signature on it because we will have an author signing table, but we do want to celebrate her as our school counselor of the year for our county. And you can definitely see why she was picked. So once again, thank you, Fran. Thank you to everybody here today for joining us. And we have a whole calendar full of professional learning for school counselors over the next 2 weeks. So please come back. Please make sure that you join us again. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, everyone.